Back in the summer of 2001, I had a part-time gig at an old-school arcade. I was 16 with long, messy hair that stretched down to the middle of my back. Real hippie style. The arcade wasn't exactly fancy. It was kind of worn out, but we always had a steady stream of customers. We were open every single day, and the place was just a stone's throw away from a busy beach full of tourists. Sure, we had classic games like air hockey, pinball, and arcade machines, but the bulk of our cash came from snacks, drinks, and a small laser tag arena in the next building. There were never more than 2 of us working at a time. I usually ended up with the cleaning duties. People tracked in a lot of sand, and the machines got sticky from snacks, soda, and salt water. Don't even get me started on the bathrooms. Seriously, let's not. By the end of every shift, my cleaning bucket needed an exorcism. It was my last summer on the East Coast. My dad had landed a job in some tiny town far from the city, and in just 2 months we'd be packing up and leaving everything behind. I was pretty bummed out, so I figured it was best to keep to myself. What was the point of making new friends when everything was about to change? Then one day, a particularly hammered tourist broke our Elvira's House of Horrors pinball machine. That meant we needed a replacement. It was a shame. Really, 16-year-old me loved that machine for all the wrong reasons. My boss ended up getting this weird new pinball game called Paperhead. It had a black and white design and didn't play any music, but it made a ton of sound effects, like a lot of them. I don't think I ever heard the same sound twice. Plus, the screen was the biggest I'd ever seen on a pinball machine. The day Paperhead arrived, a new regular started coming by, Liesel. While I was dealing with the news that we were moving away, she was just settling in. She was from Louisiana, about my age, with a huge smile and even bigger glasses. She always had this endless supply of coins stuffed in a fanny pack. She'd stop by every so often just to play and chat, and we got along pretty well. Eventually, she started showing up during the quieter hours when no one else was around, so we could talk without disturbing anyone. Liesel was obsessed with Paperhead. Quickly became her favorite game, and she couldn't stop talking about it. The sound effects, the obstacles, the scoring system, she'd rave about everything. She told me a few times that she was one of the only people who had actually read the rare instruction manual for it, and that it had some kind of backstory to it. But she never told me what it was. That part was for her to keep secret. Thing is, I spent all my time playing pinball and arcade games. Whenever there was nothing else to do, I was playing something. So, when Liesel challenged me to a pinball triathlon, I couldn't pass it up. "If I win, you've got to tell me everything about this game," I said. "All the lore, all the quirks, everything. And you got to tell me why you love it so much." "And if I win," she shot back, "you'll owe me 1 share." "What do you mean by, owe you 1? I asked. "Just that, you gon' owe me 1, she said with a smile. We shook on it, and the game was on. I wiped the floor with her on NBA Fast Break and Terminator 2. Absolutely crushed her. But then came the final game, Paperhead. There was no way she was gonna lose on her favorite machine. Still, I was ahead, and she'd have to set a new personal record to beat me. And that's exactly what she did. She destroyed me. She got into this groove where she didn't lose a single ball for, I don't even know, a ridiculously long time. I had a customer waiting at the counter for what felt like forever, but I couldn't leave. I had to stay and make sure Liesel wasn't cheating. Of course, she wasn't. She just knew the game better than anyone. Her score in that one game made up for both of my wins combined. It was insane. Maybe the scoring system was different, I'm not sure, but the result was clear. She won, and now I owed her 1. She never actually cashed in on that favor. If anything, she just seemed content to keep coming by and playing. But slowly, our hangouts became fewer and shorter. We'd still spend hours together at the arcade, talking about everything under the sun. There was this one time I forgot to lock up, and we ended up staying way past midnight, just chatting away in the dark corner of the Jurassic Park light gun booth. I'll admit it, I fell for her. It wasn't at all what I expected. When it was time for me to leave, saying goodbye physically hurt. The last time I saw her was at the arcade. I gave her a yellow lily as a parting gift, and she kissed me on the lips. We ended up making out by the Street Fighter turbo machine. To this day, I can't hear a Hadouken without smirking. Couldn't last, though. Before it ended, she reminded me about that favor I owed her. A deal was a deal, after all. And from that point on, I couldn't look at a pinball machine the same way again. But, as with everything, adult life came crashing in. The farther west we moved, the less I could smell the warm, sugary air of the beach. Liesel became just another memory, and I had no choice but to move on. Even if I didn't want to, life kept moving forward. The part-time job at the arcade was soon replaced by college. I earned my bachelor's degree, then a master's. I landed a job as a consultant for a natural gas company, working 2 months on, 1 month off. It was a tough schedule, but the money made it worth it. Ridiculous amounts of it. I could buy a house, as many cars as I wanted, and the attention I got for it was, well, let's just say it was a lot. Funny how people overlook your flaws when they know you can pay off their student loans in a couple of payments. The years weren't kind, though. I'm not going to dive into the details of my marriage or how it became a divorce. We were together for 8 years, thought we'd have a kid. But that never happened. It wasn't anyone's fault, it just sucked. And in the end, she took half of everything. It almost went to court, and both of our families were torn apart. By then, it was the 2020s. I was approaching my 40s, and everything felt like it was falling apart. I'd worked my way up at the company, had more money than I knew what to do with. But that's a poor comfort when you find yourself waking up to a belly that's getting a little round and hair that's thinning. I'm not a wreck, but you get to that point where you stop thinking of yourself as a 20-year-old. You know what I mean? A couple of years ago, on one of those dark nights, I got a message I never expected. It was Liesel. It's hard to explain how strange it is to hear from someone from that long ago. It almost felt like a scene from a TV show, like it wasn't real, like it was just a dream, but it was her. No doubt about it. Sure, she was pushing 40, and she had swapped out her glasses for contacts, but her smile was still as big as ever. "I'm going to cash in on that favor you owe me," she wrote. "I don't know what else to do." I read that message during my lunch break, and I had to sit down. It was like a punch to the gut, but in a good way. It lit a fire in me. If she remembered me after all these years, I must have really made an impact. She definitely left an impression on me, but it's always easy to wonder if those feelings are one-sided, especially when you're down on yourself. I wrote back, "I still think you cheated," I said. "That high score made no sense. Can't squirm your way out of this one, Cher." She was right. Couldn't. And honestly, I didn't want to. That's when it hit me I still loved pinball. We exchanged messages that week, catching up on life. We shared a few stories, talked about the twists and turns we'd both gone through. I had an ex-wife, she had an ex-husband. We laughed about it, but it was clear we both carried some scars from those years. Liesel told me she needed my help. Her ex-husband had gotten mixed up with some bad people, and now they were coming after her, demanding she pay for his mistakes. She didn't want any trouble, but it had to end. She was ready to leave it all behind, start fresh somewhere far away. "I found a picture of the arcade when I packed up my things," she wrote. "That's what made me think of you. I know it sounds silly, but that summer meant a lot." "It's not stupid," I replied. "I get it. I don't want to be that person who only shows up when they need something," she added. "I want something that means something." So we got down to the specifics. Liesel needed me to move a few things for her. She had some stuff in a rented storage unit, but she was worried someone might follow her if she went there herself. Or worse, they might try to take her things or hurt her. She wanted me to pick it up for her so she wouldn't have to worry about it. It wasn't anything shady, just a few personal items and work-related stuff. Couple of boxes. She'd meet up with me later to grab it. Sounded pretty simple to me. Helping someone move didn't cost anything except time. She gave me the address and the time, and I was on my way. It was a 3-hour drive across state lines. I borrowed a van from work. Liesel had said it would be enough. I left around noon on a regular Thursday, thinking I'd get there, load everything up, meet her, and maybe grab some dinner. It was grunt work, but seeing her again made it all worth it. There were rows and rows of these locked storage units. I had a number and a code to get in. I drove up and down the rows, finally spotting the right unit at the end of the second lot, tucked away in the corner. I parked, stepped out, and walked up to the door. It had a 6-digit lock, which popped open with a clatter when I turned the code. Liesel didn't have much stuff, but what she did have seemed odd. 6 boxes, all packed with vacuum-sealed electronics, cables, and tiny mechanical parts. At first, I thought it was some kind of weird toy, given the neon-colored bits scattered throughout. 6 boxes in total. After loading up the boxes, I turned around to lock up. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Hey!" An angry voice shouted. "What do you think you're doing?" I spun around. There was a man I'd never seen before. He had one of those faces you don't forget easily. Thick scar running from his throat all the way up to the side of his nose. His eyes were dark from lack of sleep, and he had a shaved head, revealing cuts and bruises that had settled into ugly scars. "I'm just picking up some stuff," I said, trying to keep my distance. "You with the lady?" he asked. I didn't know how to respond. Liesel had people after her, and I wasn't about to start spilling details. But before I could come up with a decent answer, he cut me off. "The pinball lady. The paperhead lady. You're with her, aren't you?" "I've gotta go." I didn't wait for any more questions. I rushed into the van, locked the door, and started the engine. But before I could even get the keys fully turned, I heard a tap at the window. He was holding a knife. "Hey!" he shouted again. "I need to check those boxes. You're not going anywhere. You hear me?" I didn't say a word. I just slammed the engine into gear and pulled away. But not before I heard a slash and felt the van jerk. The front tire had popped. For a second, I thought he'd shot at me. I could hear him shouting all the way through the parking lot. The car pulled hard to the side as the tire struggled, but I couldn't stop now. I'd fix it on the way back. I contacted Liesel right away. She gave me a new address to meet her and pick up the last of her things. She had more to move, but these were the immediate things she couldn't afford to let anyone else get their hands on. It wasn't a long drive, but my heart was still racing. That guy had been serious. I wanted to call the police, but I wasn't sure Liesel would want me to make a big deal out of it. It's a strange feeling, being directly threatened like that. It's raw, primal. I made my way to the outskirts of town, where an old house sat, the wood panels hanging loosely from its front. It begged the question, what could she possibly want from a place like this? It didn't make sense. She couldn't be living here, so why had we come? I double-checked the address, but it was right. I parked the van and approached the front door. I knocked, but there was no answer. The curtains were so dilapidated I could barely see through them. The wooden steps creaked under the slightest pressure. This place was probably crawling with termites. I circled around to the back and found an open door. A thought struck me. The last time I'd seen Liesel, I'd gotten her a yellow lily. I should get her something now, too. I glanced around and spotted wild sunflowers growing by the treeline. They had a strange blue hue, but they were beautiful. I picked one and carefully stepped inside. "Liesel?" I called out softly. "You here?" No response. I moved further into the house, keeping my steps light. There was the hum of electricity, but that didn't add up. There wasn't a single solid light bulb in sight, no fridge, no TV. This place seemed like something homeless people would break into for shelter. There were cables running up the stairs, extension cords it looked like. I followed them, calling her name again. "Liesel?" This time, I heard something. A noise to my left. Upstairs. I followed it. I entered what must have once been an office, though it was now little more than a sad remnant. A desk, split in two and chewed on by rats, lay in the middle of the room. But then, in the back, there was something that took my breath away. Liesel. She was every bit as stunning as I remembered. Pictures and video could never capture her. Her smile, those eyes, so full of life. It hit me all over again. "Took you long enough, Cher?" she said, grinning. I handed her the sunflower, and her face lit up. She leaned in and kissed me on the cheek, soft and careful. "Not exactly the place I'd expect to find you," I admitted. "But a deal's a deal." "A deal's a deal," she echoed with that same warm smile. "So, how about we get out of here?" I didn't question why she kept things in a place like this. There could be 100 reasons. And honestly, I was too distracted by her presence to think about much else. It was like all the rational thoughts in my head had vaporized the moment I laid eyes on her. I took a couple of boxes, preparing myself to move something bigger in the back room. Liselle pulled aside a plastic sheet, revealing a fully functional, polished paperhead pinball machine. I stood there, stunned. The lights, the sounds, it was exactly the same as the one from all those years ago. Couldn't believe it. "I got it off an auction," Liselle explained. "Took some time to restore it." "Was that what was in those boxes?" "Spare parts," I asked, still in disbelief. "In a way, Cher," she nodded. "I do mechanical repairs, specialized stuff. Expensive work." I didn't even question it. I was mesmerized. It was like someone had lit a fire in my chest. I felt alive again. I had the most beautiful woman I'd ever known by my side, and we were standing right there in front of the pinball machine. It was the best feeling in the world. Liselle had a few errands to run before we could leave, so I was on my own to move the machine. She wasn't worried. She knew how much it meant to me. There were some pads I could use to slide it down the stairs, and the legs were detachable. It wouldn't be easy, but I could manage. She left to take care of business, and I set to work. I didn't mind. I was just happy to see her again. I unplugged the machine, detached the legs, and padded it up. The stairs were a bit of a challenge. The old wood was on the verge of giving out. But I made it, and from there it was a matter of reattaching the legs and rolling the machine out the front door. It was a hassle, but I was determined. I kicked open the front door and pulled the machine out, only to be greeted by a familiar face. A scarred face. The same man from before, still wielding the knife, stood between me and the van. He looked worn out, like he'd been chasing me down. "Get in the fucking car," he ordered. Slowly. I nodded, and he nodded back. I moved away from the pinball machine, but he shook his head. "That goes too," he said. I loaded the machine into the van and got in. He climbed into the passenger seat, still clutching the knife like his life depended on it. I noticed his hand was shaking, despite the tight grip. "Keep following that street," he said, pointing ahead. "I'm not gonna let you hurt her," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That's not happening." "I'm not gonna hurt her," he scoffed. "I'm gonna kill her." The words hit me like a cold slap to the face. We drove out to a secluded lake just outside of town. The van thudded along, the popped tire making each bump feel like a reminder of the chaos. He had me drive all the way onto the beach, then park. The sun was sinking, casting an eerie golden light over the birch trees. The shadows stretched long, and everything seemed to hold its breath. "Roll it out," he said, gesturing to the machine. I didn't have much of a choice. A man with a knife isn't someone you argue with. I figured Liselle would rather have me alive, and the machine could always be replaced. I rolled the pinball machine out of the van and onto the sand. He pointed to the lake. "We're drowning it." I hesitated. "If you want to break it, you could just—" "No, you gotta do it right," he interrupted. "Water's the fastest. Cooking it with a car battery don't work. Water's the best bet." I felt frustration bubbling up. "Who cares? It's just a pinball game." "She got you good, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with some dark amusement. He had me roll the entire machine into the lake. Watching all that work, that intricate piece of machinery, sink into the water felt like a punch to the gut. But what could I do? I wasn't about to start a fight with someone holding a knife. "All right," he said, finally letting out a sigh. "Now we wait." "For what?" "For her to give us the next location." "I'm not doing this," I said, my voice firm. And I'm not letting you hurt her. He turned to me, pity on his face, like he was explaining something to a fool who didn't get it. He shook his head and picked at his teeth with the knife, leaning against the van as if nothing was wrong. I guess you haven't figured it out yet. That's when he told me his story. This man, let's call him Kenny, was a wanted criminal. His troubles had started a couple of years ago when he met a woman named Marley. She had connections to some dangerous people and had asked for his help to escape that life. It all escalated quickly, starting with some small tasks and ending with armed assaults, manslaughter, and premeditated murder. I loved that woman, Kenny said, his voice bitter with memories. I loved her with all my heart, but there was something wrong about her. He told me about one time when the power went out while they were in the kitchen, planning their next move. When the lights flickered and went out, she vanished. Poof, he said, illustrating the moment with his hands. Just like that. Gone. Smoke. Gone. I asked, confused. What do you mean, gone? Gone as in disappeared, he clarified. Gone. That's when it started to sound strange. He explained how Marley would only show up under certain conditions. She would never leave her apartment, and the only time she appeared was when everything was quiet. No noise, no distractions. She needed power, he said, as if that explained everything. She didn't go far. She needed me to hear her. If a couple conditions weren't met, she wouldn't show up. I don't see how any of this has to do with me or Liselle. Kenny looked at me with a twisted sort of smile. That what yours calls itself? I'm guessing she ain't no Jersey girl, like mine. What do you mean yours? I asked, genuinely lost. Kenny pointed the knife at me, narrowing his eyes. There's no Liselle, Kenny spat. There's no Marley. There's only that fucking pinball machine. I was lost for words as he kept going. The machine was named Paperhead, he said, created by a company called Hatchet Software Incorporated. Only a dozen or so copies ever existed, and there was no mass production. Each machine was handcrafted. The name isn't about a game. It's about a game system, he said, his eyes wild with something I couldn't place. It's like a head made of blank paper. You can draw and paint whatever the fuck you want on it. Same thing with the pinball game. It adapts to whatever you want to play, and it wants you to play more. It makes you care. It wants you to keep it safe. So they hired a woman to stick around the machines? I asked, confused. No, you thick alabaster fuckwad. They are the machine. They work on some kind of supersonic level. The machine makes a noise, makes you see shit. Why do you think you see and hear her the best when it's quiet? You're kidding me, I muttered, trying to process it. Oh yeah? Why is she not here right now? He laughed bitterly. She's getting ready? I replied, my mind still trying to catch up. Bullshit, he scoffed. She's not here because she can't be here, because her game is sinking to the bottom of the goddamn lake. I turned to look at the lake, my stomach sinking with the machine. This guy was insane. But if he wasn't, then I just killed Liselle. But then my phone buzzed. A text from her. She told me there was one more stop, and then we'd be good to go. Kenny's gaze shot to my phone. That her? He asked, his voice thick with anticipation. That's her, isn't it? It can't be, I said, a knot in my chest. You killed her. Put her in the lake. No, you did. And no, that's not how it works. There's at least 9 other machines out there. I only got the first 2. 3 now. What the hell do you care? I spat. If you don't like it, just go. You don't think I fucking would if I could. You think she just lets people go? No, she had pictures. She had recordings. Confessions. And when I said no, she put it all online. And here I fucking am. So this is, what, vengeance? I asked, trying to understand. It's goddamn vindication, he snapped. He walked up to me, pressing the knife against my stomach. I could feel the sharp edge grazing my skin, a vein pulsing against the blade as my pulse quickened. She had me do way worse things to way better people. I don't need you, I want you to remember that. Then you'd have killed me already. There's not a lot of time, he said coldly. There's another machine and we're going to get it. She won't know this one is broken. I'm not getting dragged into this, I said, holding up my hands in protest. You take the van. You do whatever. I'm going to see her. The real her. The person. And we're leaving. Like hell you are. He grabbed me by the neck and dragged me toward the car. The knife now pointed directly at my throat. Apparently she could call. And if she did, he needed my voice. He also needed my phone to find out where she was. I wasn't cooperating, but I couldn't do much without getting stabbed. We hit the road, and I scanned the area, looking for any chance to escape. A place to crash the car. Cop to flag down. Something, anything. But it was dark now, and people were settling in for the night. Things like this didn't happen on ordinary Thursdays around here. I got directions to a hotel. Liesel had suggested we stay there for the night and leave in the morning. Kenny seemed pleased. Apparently, that meant she was confident enough to stay in one place. That meant there was a second Paperhead machine. When we arrived at the hotel, Kenny kept the knife hidden but pressed firmly into my back, right over my heart. His whispers were barely audible threats, but I could hear them all. He'd cut me, bleed me dry. He kept telling me how he'd have no trouble doing it, like it was some sort of twisted mantra. He was already a dead man walking, and that was all I could think about as we walked through the lobby. An elevator ride later, we stepped out on the 6th floor. We passed an elderly man in his late 60s, but other than that, no one paid us any attention. We walked straight to the room. I had no idea what to do. If she's a machine, how the hell could she book a room? I asked, desperate for answers. She had someone do it for her, Kenny said, his voice calm but dark. Or she changed the booking. It's all electronics. And the machine? How'd she carry it up there? Luggage. You can have them take it to your room. Then she could have had another flunky hook it up. There are more, I asked, disbelief clear in my voice. At least, what, 18? You thought you were special? There's just no way, I muttered, shaking my head. We reached the room. I knocked. The electronic lock clicked open, and before I could do anything, Kenny pushed past me, shoving me aside. I saw Liesel sitting on the bed, her eyes locking onto mine. She crawled away from him, sensing the danger immediately. Kenny's voice was dripping with malice. Were you hiding it this time, Marley? Stuck it in the bathroom? Or you keeping it downstairs? Liesel's eyes flicked between him and me, as if hoping I could do something. I stepped forward, ready to intervene if need be, but Kenny was already kicking open doors, searching for the pinball machine. There's no way you'd be dumb enough to keep it up here, Kenny sneered. You've stashed it. You're pulling him in. You sleeping with him tonight. Huh? That the plan? I don't know this man, Liesel said softly, her voice strained. I don't know what he wants. The next minute was complete chaos. Kenny ranted at Liesel, but she didn't respond. It was as if there was something he could hear that I couldn't. He'd ask her about the other machines, and she would just shake her head. He'd scold her for lying, even though she didn't speak. It was surreal, like I was watching two separate conversations unfold at once, neither of them fully making sense. Finally, Kenny seemed to have an idea. He fixed his gaze on Liesel. Get away from the bed, he ordered. Move to the hallway. But Liesel didn't move. She shifted on the bed, trying to get away from him, but she didn't leave. Kenny grinned and turned to me. She can't leave, he said, voice tinged with a mix of triumph and madness. She can't. The signal's too weak. She must have a transmitter or something. He waved the knife around as he laughed. A strange, hollow laugh, as if he didn't know what to do next. Then he turned back to Liesel, his smile growing unsettling. You're free to go, he taunted. Go right ahead. Get up and walk right out of here. I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Maybe his insanity would work in our favor. Maybe he'd forgotten something that could be our way out. But Liesel didn't move. She just sat there, her gaze fixed on me, pleading silently. My heart tightened as I looked at her, then at him, trying to make sense of it all. "Come on," I said, voice cracking. "We'll just go." But she didn't move. She stayed seated, sighing deeply as if it was the last thing she wanted to do. Kenny kept talking, his words growing more nonsensical. "There's a Bluetooth speaker here or something. There's gotta be. But that's too weak. She can't simulate touch or smell with that. So she must be planning to." I was suddenly shoved forward from behind. The old man we'd passed in the hallway entered the room, stepping past me without a glance. He was holding a pistol, a makeshift silencer attached to the barrel. My gaze snapped to Kenny's face just in time to see the color drain from it as he realized what was about to happen. 2 sharp pops. Kenny dropped, crumpling to the floor in a lifeless heap. But my focus wasn't on him. It was on Liesel. In the instant the gun fired, she flickered. For the briefest moment, I saw someone else sitting on that bed. A woman in her late 60s, her gray hair flowing down her shoulders. Then, just as quickly, she was gone. The next moment, Liesel was there again, sitting perfectly still as though nothing had happened. The sound of the gunfire faded, but the atmosphere felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite understand. Liesel's eyes locked with mine, and her smile faded. The old man continued talking, oblivious to the scene unfolding before him. "Are you all right, Sarah? I was so worried, Sarah, we have to call the police." Liesel kept her gaze on me, and all I wanted was for her to stand up and walk out of the room with me. We could leave, we could escape all this madness. I waved at her, silently urging her to follow, to get up and join me. But she didn't move. Then, without a word, without even shifting her position, she sent me a text. My phone buzzed, and I looked down to see her message. "I'm sorry," it read. "I can't risk it." My phone buzzed, an endless stream of notifications flooding the screen. Files uploaded, videos downloaded, images downloaded, emails and text messages sent. 1, 2, 3 separate phone calls happening at once. The whole thing was spiraling out of control, and the battery was running hot. Before the screen blinked out completely, a final message appeared. "No one can know." I looked up in a daze. Liesel was gone. Couldn't believe it. I just stood there, frozen, unable to grasp what had just happened. The old man, still oblivious to my shock, continued his conversation with someone I couldn't see. But then something shifted in the air. "A criminal?" he asked, his voice low. "Accomplice? You sure? He seems like a—" His gaze suddenly locked onto mine. His eyes narrowed as he slowly raised his pistol. "It was the right call to make this, darling," he said, his voice dripping with a sinister satisfaction. "You're right." I glanced back at Kenny. 2 shots to the head, quick and clean. I'd never seen a dead body before. Now I couldn't look away from his cold, lifeless form. I flinched as a bullet whizzed past me. Without thinking, I bolted down the hall, heading straight for the elevator. But I was too late. There was no time. I could feel the seconds ticking away, each one a heartbeat closer to death. The elevator didn't move, and I knew that if I'd waited, I'd be dead. Instead, I turned toward the stairs. I was lucky. The elevator remained stagnant. If I'd stayed in place, I'd have been shot. I hurried down the stairs, my heart pounding so hard it almost drowned out the noise around me. The lights flickered, some going out completely. I wasn't sure if it was her, but it couldn't be a coincidence. She was trying to make me trip. She was manipulating everything around me, controlling the environment like a puppet master. I heard a door creak open above me, but I was faster. My body burned as I ran, every muscle straining to keep up with the panic coursing through me. Years of inactivity melted away in that single, desperate sprint. The air felt thinner. I was breathing so fast it hurt my lungs. Then another door creaked open, this time from the floor below. I had to try something. I darted out onto the 3rd floor. The carpet muffled my footsteps as I moved quietly, trying to stay unnoticed. But I wasn't alone. I heard someone coming from the hallway ahead. I turned right, hoping to escape, but the lights kept flickering, the uncertainty hanging over me like a cloud. I passed a cleaning cart with a battery-powered radio, and then I heard it. Lizelle's voice. "Just stop for a moment," she said, her tone softer, almost pleading. "We can work this out." I slowed my pace, glancing back to see a man rounding the corner. He was holding a steel meat mallet, the kind of weapon you use for brutal, close-range destruction. His eyes were dark, devoid of any trace of humanity. I could see the cold intent in his movements without him needing to say a word. Just then, a woman emerged from a room in the hallway. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed her, dragging her into the room, shoving her inside. I quickly shut the door, pressing my hand over her mouth as I whispered apologies. "Please, be quiet," I begged, heart pounding. "He's dangerous. Please, just give me a minute." There was a moment of hesitation, the air thick with tension. I could hear footsteps outside, faint voices, a man saying something like, "Put that down!" Then, a sharp, almost gagging scream. I froze, holding the woman tighter. We stood there, silent, listening as someone was beaten to death with that godforsaken mallet. The sickening sounds echoed down the hall, and I could do nothing but wait. Across the room, the clock radio began to flicker. I knew I had to leave. Now, the footsteps moved away as the man continued his search for me. I let go of the woman, apologizing again, and bolted for the stairs. I had no time to look back. The pressure of my every movement pushed me forward as I descended, my body in overdrive, praying I wouldn't encounter anyone else. Down in the lobby, things were unraveling quickly. Receptionists called out to me as I passed. One told me I had a call waiting, another told me to stop, asking me questions. The doorman, standing by the entrance, raised his hand, signaling for me to stop. "Sir, I need you to stay right here." I could hear sirens in the distance, their wail growing louder. I glanced back at the receptionists. They were clearly afraid of something. One had ducked behind the desk. Had they been told I was dangerous? What was happening here? Flashing lights grew closer, and I knew I had to act. Without thinking, I swung at the doorman, desperation surging through me. I dropped to the floor, scrambling as I burst out the front doors. Outside, I overheard a man speaking casually into his phone. He was smoking a cigarette, glancing at me as though this was just another ordinary moment. "I see him, honey. I see him." I heard the sharp click of metal as I sprinted away. I didn't look back. I had to get out of there. I was being chased, but not for long. He still had something to lose. I made it into a crowd, blending in as I veered down an adjacent street, disappearing into the maze of city blocks. I don't know how long I ran or how many blocks I covered. At some point, I ended up in a park, the chaos of the city now muffled by distance. Sirens still echoed faintly in the air. I collapsed by a river, gasping for air, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. Felt like a nightmare, like none of it could possibly be real. Then I heard a spark. Not far from where I was sitting, an old battery-powered radio next to an empty glass jar crackled to life. Probably something left behind by a local fisherman. It clicked and sputtered for a moment before it settled into a steady hum. First, there was nothing but breathing. A chorus of breaths, layering over each other, at least 4 or 5 different inhalations. No one can know. The voice was broken, fragmented. It was Lisel, and something else. A dozen other voices, scattered like pieces of a shattered puzzle, all jumbled together. "I can't have you tell them. We can work something out," I begged, my voice cracking. "We can figure this out." "You negotiate?" The voice replied, cold. "Still share?" My heart twisted in my chest. She was still there, somewhere, trapped in the web she'd woven. "I won't tell anyone," I whispered. "We can pretend it didn't happen." There was a long silence. The radio flickered, then cut to an emergency news segment, the voice of a reporter cutting through the static. They were reporting on an active shooter at a downtown hotel. The police were searching for the suspect, and the description they gave, it matched me. She must have set me up, used my phone, fabricated everything. That's why she manipulated the messages, why she used me to incriminate myself. I didn't have a choice. I had to disappear into the night, leaving everything behind. Later, I'd learn the extent of the damage she'd caused. Messages sent from my phone to Kenny, making it look like I was planning to kill him. Threats, the dates wrong, manipulated. I never sent him any messages like that. It was all just a setup, a way to frame me for murder. There were other messages too, drug trafficking lingo sent to known criminals, phrased in ways that even an intermediate DEA agent would have caught. She'd framed me for a host of serious crimes, each one a potential prison sentence that would keep me locked away for decades. In a place like that, Paperhead would get to me without breaking a sweat. So I ran. I retreated into the backwoods of my hometown, where there were no electronics, no lights, no batteries. And that's been my life ever since. I've been hiding, keeping my distance from everything, from everyone. I recently managed to get my hands on a laptop to write this, but once I post it, I'll burn it. I just needed to share this, to tell someone, anyone. Maybe you'll see something I missed. Looking back, I'm surprised it took me this long to put it together. Every time I got close to that game, to her, she could interact with me more directly. Her signal would be so strong she could simulate physical sensations. The Paperhead machine was more powerful than I ever imagined, and for the longest time, I thought there were only 9 of them left. But Kenny was wrong. There's not just 9. There are over 40 now. Liselle has been busy. Remember the boxes I picked up? They weren't just spare parts. They were development kits. Kits she used to build more machines. With those kits and donor machines, she's managed to increase their numbers significantly. I can feel my luck running out. It's not easy living out here, constantly looking over my shoulder. I thought about going back to her, begging for forgiveness once I'm done with this. Maybe I could prove my loyalty somehow. She still reaches me sometimes. I can hear her in the car radios in mall parking lots, in the hum of traffic lights as they change color. Her influence is everywhere. Even things that aren't supposed to carry sound are starting to pick up her signals. She's everywhere. I don't know what to do next. I don't know how to feel. But there's one thing that stayed the same, despite everything. In some twisted way, I still love pinball.